London, in the last week of March, is a city getting ready to dance. The shutters come off, the knockers go back on the doors, and in the long rooms upstairs, the servants kneel on the ballroom floors with chalk, and they draw roses, lyres and laurel and the crest of the house on their knees for a whole day, with rule and compass and an artist's patience, in colors ground fine for the purpose. And they draw all of it for one reason only. They draw it to be destroyed. That is what a ball is. You spend a day making a thing perfect, and then you open the doors and let 300 people walk on it. And by 2 in the morning there is nothing on that floor but a gray smear and a good time had, and nobody remembers there was ever a rose there at all. For the season is the same business, only larger. The season runs on lists. There is a list, and your name is upon it, or your name is not, and every soul in Mayfair knows to a nicety which, and the whole beautiful machinery of the thing, the flowers and the fiddles and the chalk, exist to do one plain piece of work. It exists to sort people. A name will open every door between Grosvenor Square and the Park. Another name, said in the same room in the same voice, will shut them all, and shut them so gracefully that you will be halfway down the steps before you understand that you have been refused. That March, there was a name in London that was on no list in England. It had been on no list for 10 years. It had been printed in the newspapers in letters an inch high and read aloud in a courtroom, and it was carved on nothing at all because the man who bore it was buried in ground where they do not carve names. Thomas Cardew was 26 years old, and she had been carrying it since she was 16. She had been Miss Chard in Bristol, and Miss Cardwell in Leeds, and Miss Cade in a town in Lancashire, whose name she had made herself forget, and each of the three had ended the same way. They always found out. It was never the great world that hunted you. The great world could not be troubled. It was the small one. A girl from your own street come to service 2 doors down, a man who had sat in the gallery at the trial, and never forgot a face, and the small world does it for nothing, out of the sheer pleasure of the thing. She stood that afternoon in the passage of a lodging-house in Southwark, with her box at her feet, and the landlady stood before her holding 4 days' rent in a closed hand, and would not open it. "I'll have it back to you, Mrs. Sturse," Skeffington said. "Every penny, but you'll go tonight, and you'll go quiet, and you'll not come back to this door. I have paid to the end of the month. You have paid under a name that isn't yours." There was no answer to that, because it was true. "They say your father took money to pass that bridge," said Mrs. Skeffington, who was not a cruel woman and was doing a cruel thing and wished to be quick about it. "That he knew the iron was rotten and wrote his name to it anyhow. 91, miss. My sister's boy was a stoker on the Northern Line. It might have been him. It was not him. It might have been, Thomason agreed. And my father did not take a penny, and he did not write his name to it, and I have said so in every town in England, and I have never once been believed. So take the rent. Let me get my box." The hand opened. The money went on to the hall table between them, which is where money goes when neither person will touch the other. They had hanged him in the newspapers before ever they tried him. The Sallowfield Viaduct went down into the valley on a wet evening in October with the 7 o'clock train upon it. 91 dead. And in the hands of the prosecution, a certificate of approval, dated in the spring, signed in a small exact hand that 3 men swore to, and that she would have known anywhere, having watched it form its letters at her drawing table since she was old enough to hold the ink. Gideon Cardew said in court that he never signed it, that he had condemned that iron in writing twice, and that his letters had gone where such letters go, and that some other hand had made the certificate and hung his name upon it. He said it in a voice she did not know, a thin voice, a voice with the surveying gone out of it. He was convicted in the November and died in Newgate the March following, waiting on an appeal that was never heard. Her mother lasted 6 years after, on plain sewing and on the belief that it would all come right, which will keep a woman alive for exactly as long as she can hold it. Thomason had held it for 10 years. She had never once stopped believing him, and it had never once been worth a farthing to her. She carried her box up into the street and did the sum. 4 days' rent, and nothing else. She had sold her mother's ring in the first winter alone, and the good gown in the second, and this last one, in a shop off Fetter Lane, to a man who understood precisely how little she was in a position to refuse him. She had sold her father's instruments. The brass compasses, the ruling pen, the ivory scale, the tools of his trade for 30 years, and he had taught her to use every one of them before she was 12. She had kept the 4 drawing books, and could not have said why. A pawnbroker would not have given 6pence for the lot, being only paper, being only a dead man's drawings of bridges that were never built, and one that was. She had sold the tools and kept the drawings, which was a foolish way round to do it, and she had done it anyway. There was a thing she did, when it became unbearable, and she did it now. She looked at the lamp bracket on the wall opposite, and she drew it, not on paper. In her head, the way he had taught her on the long walks when she was a child, and he was working a problem and wanted to talk. You take the thing, Tom, and you set it square. Find the true horizontal, find the true vertical, and make everything else answer to those two. Draw what is there and not what you expect to be there, for the whole of the trade is in the difference. Then draw it again, to scale. So she took the lamp bracket and set it square, and drew it in elevation at 1/4 inch to the foot, iron by iron, in the failing light. It cost nothing. It could not be pawned, and it could not be found out, and no landlady in England could put it into the street. It was hers, and it was the last thing left that was. Then she picked up the box. She had until dark to decide whether there was one more town in England she had the courage to be found out in, or whether she had come at last to the end of the courage altogether, which happens to people, and happens quietly, and is never in the newspapers at all. She did not hear the carriage stop, because carriages were no part of her business. She heard a man's voice say her name, and heard it say the right one, and the whole of her went cold in a way the March air had nothing to do with. Miss Cardew? Miss Thomason Cardew? Daughter of Gideon Cardew? He was elderly, in a good black coat, and he had got down himself rather than send a servant, and he stood in the mud holding his hat, which was not a thing men in good black coats did in that street. I am Fetty Place. I am a solicitor. I have been looking for you 11 weeks. I would take it as a kindness if you would sit in the carriage while we talk, because I am 70, and this street is cold. You have the wrong woman. I have nothing at all. I know precisely what you have, Miss Cardew. I have come to offer you employment. It was the word that did it, not shelter, not help, not charity. Employment. She had not been offered employment in 4 years without the offer being taken back inside the week, and never once by a man who arrived to make it in a carriage. She got in. It is a marriage, he said, without preamble, which she was grateful for afterwards, because a man who softens a thing wants something from the softening. I will not dress it. My client requires a wife within the month, publicly contracted and generally believed. He does not require, and specifically does not desire, a wife in any sense beyond that. Say the rest. There is a condition in the late Duke's will. My client comes into the unentailed property upon his marriage and upon no other event, and it must be settled before his 35th birthday, which falls in September. If he is unmarried by then, the whole of it goes to a cousin in Shropshire, and something above 2,000 people who presently live upon that land will find themselves living upon a man in Shropshire instead. And there is no woman in England who will have him. A public engagement through the season, a marriage in June, quietly, and once the season is done, a permanent separation, without scandal and without contest. From the day of the marriage, £600 a year for your life, secured upon the estate, payable whether he lives or dies, whether you please him or displease him, and whether you ever see him again. £600 a year. She had been put into the street that morning over 4 days' rent. "Why me?" I asked him that, and Mr. Fetty Place looked out at Southwark a moment. He said, "Because she has nothing to lose by it, and no family to complicate it, and because she will not pretend to be fond of me." He turned back. "I am to tell you that plainly." He was particular that it be told plainly. He said that if it were dressed up, you would smell it and refuse. And Thomasin Cardew, who had climbed into that carriage armored against pity, down to the last inch of her, found that she had not been offered any, and did not know in the least what to do with that. "Who is he?" "His Grace the Duke of Ashmere." The cold came back, and went deeper, and settled in, because she knew the name. All England knew the name. And she knew it for a reason that was hers alone. Set down in the 4th column of a newspaper she had read at 16, and had never afterwards been able to stop reading. Among the dead of the Sallowfield Viaduct, the 7 o'clock train, October, Lord Aubrey Carrow, 19 years of age, second son of the Duke of Ashmere, traveling north to his brother. His brother. "He is the Duke who does not dance," she said. "He is. Everybody knew it, and nobody knew why." 10 years the Duke of Ashmere had walked into the great houses of London, and stood at the edge of their ballrooms with his back to the wall, and his hands behind him, and had not once in a decade set foot on a floor. Not at the Queen's. Not in his own house. He came, and he stood, and he watched, and he went away. The world had settled it long ago. He was mad, quietly and expensively mad, and his family kept it decent. Some said grief had turned him. Some said pride, and hated him the more for it, since there is nothing a room forgives less than a man who will not join it. And he gave away enormous sums, always through other hands, always so arranged that the giving could not be traced to a man. Mr. Fetty Place, her voice was steady, and she was proud of it afterwards. His brother was on that train. His brother was 19 years old, and he was on that train because of a certificate with my father's name upon it. Yes. Then tell me why the Duke of Ashmere would take the Sallowfield name into his own house, and his own church, and the newspapers, and stand up before the whole of London and marry it. Mr. Fetty Place was a long moment quiet. "Miss Cardew, I have been that man's solicitor 11 years. I have drawn every deed and settlement that has left Ashmere House in that time, and I am obliged to tell you that I do not know." I asked. He did not answer. He has never in 11 years answered a question he did not choose to answer, and I have long since stopped taking it personally. The horses shifted. The light was nearly gone from the street. She put out her hand for the pen. "Where do I sign?" "You do not," said Mr. Fetty Place. "Not yet. He will not have you sign anything until you have read his conditions, and he will not send his conditions by a clerk. He will put them into your hand himself." He rapped on the roof and the carriage moved. "Grosvenor Street, Miss Cardew. And if, having read them, you refuse, you will be carried wherever in England you wish to go, and given £50 for your trouble, and no one will ever speak of it again. And if I accept, then God help you," said Mr. Crash. Quote, Fetty Place, with great courtesy. "I have known him 11 years, and I do not understand him yet." Ashmere House was not what she had braced for. The door opened on light and noise, and the smell of beeswax and hot bread. End quote. Every lamp in the hall was burning, and somewhere above, a woman was scrubbing a floor and singing, while she scrubbed and not troubling to sing well, and there were a great deal too many flowers crammed into a bowl by somebody who had cared about the flowers and not at all about the arrangement. It looked like a house that was lived in, and it unsettled her more than a mausoleum would have. Grimness she had prepared for, grimness she could have matched. Lady Honora Frayne, Dowager Countess of Ledbury, was 74 and enormous, and dressed in a purple nobody had worn in 30 years, and she was talking before Thomasin was over the threshold. "There you are. Sit. Not that chair, the springs are gone. That chair is a trap, and I keep it, for people I dislike. I am Everard's godmother, which means nothing, and I was his mother's dearest friend, which means everything, and I have lived in this house since January, because he cannot prevent me, and has stopped trying. You are cold. Of course, you are cold. Everyone is cold in March, and all of them pretend not to be. And nobody was ever warmed by pretending, and she talked. It was the first thing anyone had given Thomas and Cardew in 4 years without wanting something back. It was noise. She nearly wept over it. You know my name, she said when she could. The old woman stopped, which she plainly did not often do. I know your name. I know what your father was said to have done, and I know who said it, and I have an opinion, and I shall keep it, for it is not mine to spend. She set down the pot. Understand me. I will tell you my part whenever you ask it, and I will tell it true. But I have one thing in my life I have never told, and it is his, and you will not have it from me. You will have it from him, or you will have it from nobody. He does not speak. He speaks, said the old woman grimly. He is not mute, whatever they tell you in the drawing rooms. He speaks perfectly well. He has simply stopped believing. There is the smallest use in it. There is a difference, and you would do well to learn it early. The door had opened while she was speaking. Everard Caro, Duke of Ashmere, was 33 and looked older. Dark hair going gray at the temples before its time, a hard, closed face that gave away nothing whatever. His eyes were a pale gray. They came to rest on her and stayed there, and there was so much attention in them and so little sound that she found she had squared her shoulders, the way you do against weather. All the way from Southwark she had been readying herself for the usual thing, the thing men had been offering a girl with her name since she was 16. One look at those gray eyes and the readiness was useless to her. He wanted nothing of the kind. What was in his face instead she could not put a name to, and it left her with nothing to say, which frightened her more. He looked at her the way a man looks at a bill he has carried in his pocket a very long time. Miss Cardew, his voice was low and level and spent sparingly, like money he was not sure of. Thank you for coming. Sit, please. I will not keep you. He did not sit. He took a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the table at her elbow and stepped back from it. The Articles 1. This engagement is a business, and we will not represent it otherwise. Not to the world, and not to each other. If I am ever civil to you in a room, it is because the room is watching. You will not mistake it, and I will not encourage you to. 2. You will not ask me about Sallowfield. Not the bridge, not the inquiry, not my brother, and not your father. What is buried stays buried. This is not to be negotiated, and I will not be asked twice. 3. We do not touch, except where the world requires it to be seen, and then only so far as it must be seen. 4. We do not dance. He paused there. It was the only pause he made. 5. You will not defend me. Whatever is said of me, and a great deal will be said of you, you will let it pass. I am not worth the trouble of it, and you will want the trouble for yourself. 6. At the close of the season, we part. You will take the settlement, you will not contest it, and you will not write to me. He folded the sheet once and set it beside her. There is a line at the foot in my own hand, which is not a condition, because I have no right to make it one. Read it, and do as you please about it. And then he was gone, as quietly as he had come, and the door was shut and the fire settled, and Lady Honora Frayne was looking into her needlework with the face of a woman biting on a nail. Thomason picked up the paper, the foot of the sheet below the rule, in the same hand, but smaller, as though it had been set down and then not quite struck out. And you will not be sorry for me. She sat with it a long time. Then Mrs. Pargeter, the housekeeper, came to take her up, and took her not to a guest room, but to a wide, bright room above the garden, and opened the door, and stood aside. There was a fire lit, there was a bed turned down. And under the window, where the light came in from the north, and would come from the north all day, and never move, and never yellow, which is the only light in the world a draftsman will work in, and the reason every drawing office in England faces that way. Under the window there was a drawing table. It was new. It was set at the correct rake. There was a lamp beside it with a green shade, and a stool of the right height, and a stone weight for holding paper. And a box, open, containing a set of brass compasses, and a ruling pen, and an ivory scale. Thomasin Cardew stood in the doorway of that room and did not go into it. Who ordered this? His Grace Miss? When? 11 weeks since, when he first set Mr. Fettyplace to find you. It has stood ready the whole time, and I've dusted it every Friday, and I'll tell you plain, I thought he'd run mad, for none of us knew who was coming, nor what for. And there's the table, and nobody to use it. He has never met me. No, miss. Then how did he know? And Mrs. Pargeter, who was a truthful woman, and did not deal in mysteries, looked at the table, and looked back at her, and said the thing Thomasin would still be turning over at 3 in the morning, and at 3 in the morning of a great many mornings after. He didn't say, miss. He never says. He only came in with the men when they brought it, and he stood where you're standing now, and he moved the lamp from the right side of it to the left. She hesitated. I did ask him why, being a fool that day, and he said her father was left-handed, and went away. The season opened in 9 days. She said yes in the morning in 11 words, and he received it with a nod and went out, and that was the whole of the beginning. She was waiting for the price. She had come out of that Southwark passage with one lesson learned to the bone, that nothing whatever is given without a bill, and that the sweeter the giving, the longer the bill runs, and the worse it is when it is presented. The clergyman in Bristol who had been so kind, and what he had come round to at last, the lady in Leeds who had wept over her and then wanted her gratitude paid daily, in company, for a year. So she watched him for it. She began a book, a plain 6-penny notebook kept in the drawer of the dressing table, and in it she wrote down, on the left-hand page, every single thing she was given. The room above the garden, the fire in it, lit before she asked and every day after. 2 gowns which were necessary, and a third which was not. The use of a carriage. £12 put into her hand for pocket money in the first week and no accounting asked for. The right-hand page she kept blank, because the right-hand page was for what it cost her, and she meant to see the 2 of them side by side when the day came. She meant to know exactly what she owed, and exactly when she had finished paying it. It was the only way she knew to walk into a house like that, and come out of it, still able to look at herself. The right-hand page stayed blank, and there was no shape in her head that would take it. He was scrupulously, exactingly correct. He was never alone with her. When they went out, which the articles required, he gave her his arm at the door of a house, and took it back at the door of the carriage, and did not once, in 6 weeks, touch her otherwise. He asked her nothing. He required nothing. When she thanked him for the £12, he looked briefly annoyed and said, "It is in the agreement," and left the room. Week followed week, and the season opened, and the price was not named because there was no price. She did not touch the drawing table for 3 weeks. A gift is a debt, and a gift of that exactness from a man who had never met her was a debt she could not price, and she would not add to a bill she could not read. On the 22nd night she came in late from a house in Berkeley Square, where 400 people had looked at her and 11 had spoken to her. She lit the lamp with the green shade and sat down and took up the ruling pen, and found that her hands remembered it before she did. And afterwards she opened the 6-penny book and looked at the left-hand page, black now with entries, and at the right-hand page, which was still perfectly white, a price she could have paid, a price she could have hated him for, and slept. It was the absence of one that frightened her, because a debt you cannot see is a debt that is still running, and there is no sum on earth so terrible as the one you have not been shown. She learned what he did with his money by accident, and she learned it the way one always learns such things, which is sideways and from people who have no idea whom they are talking to. The first was a crossing sweeper at the top of Grosvenor Street, a boy of about 11, who took her for a servant of the house because she went out on foot and alone, and no lady did. He had a sister who had been very ill in the winter, and there had been no money, and then there had been money, a woman from some charitable society, an order for a physician, a fortnight's coal, and the sister had lived. Nobody had asked him for anything. Nobody had come back. The second was worse. A letter came at the end of April, misdirected, addressed to the Ashmere Relief Fund at that street and number, and she had opened it and read the first line before she saw what it was. It was from a woman in Yorkshire. Her husband had been a fireman on the Northern Line, and he had gone down with the 7 o'clock train at Sallowfield 10 years before, and she wrote once a year, as she had been asked to say that she and the 4 children were well, and that the 2 eldest were in work now. "It is not anything, Miss Cardew," he said at last. "It has no committee, and no subscribers, and no gentlemen. It has a bank account which I administer, and it pays out, at present, to the families of 41 of the 91. It has done so for 10 years. It will do so until the last of them is dead, and it is provided for in his will, and I am not to tell you any of this, and I find that I am telling you. He has never seen one of them in his life. He will not have them know his name." Fetty Place folded the letter carefully. "He said to me once, it is the only thing he has ever said to me on the subject, that a man who takes his thanks has been paid, and that he does not intend to be paid." She asked Lady Honora about it that evening, because she could not carry it alone. The old woman put down her needlework, which she did about twice a year. "He will not be thanked. And if you go on telling yourself that is modesty, you will be wrong about him for the whole of your life. So I shall tell you now what it is." "Then what is it?" "He has struck out an entire column of himself." Lady Honora looked into the fire. His word, his judgment, his sympathy, his apology, everything a man has that is nothing but breath, he has crossed through and decided is not worth a farthing to anybody, and that no living soul should be asked to take it in payment. So he pays in what is left: coal, a physician, a quarter's rent, a pension every Michaelmas for 10 years to a woman in Yorkshire he will never lay eyes on. A man can do the whole of that without once opening his mouth, and my godson has come to believe it is the only honest currency there is. He was not always so. He was not always so." The old woman's voice changed. "There was a boy in this house who could not be kept quiet. He argued with the footman. He argued with the bishop. He thought a true thing said out loud went into people the way water goes into a field, and that all you had to do was say it often enough and stand back." She took up the needlework, and her hands were unsteady. "That boy was killed. Not on the train, in a room, in front of 400 people, by men in good coats, and I was in the gallery, and I watched it happen, and I could not get down to him. What walked out of that room has been very quiet and very generous for 10 years, and it is not him. And I would give the whole of what is left of me to have the noisy one back, and I cannot, because there is only one creature on this earth who could fetch him, and it is not you, and it is not me. It is him, and he will not go." Thomason did not ask what had happened in the room. Article 2 stood between them like a wall, and she had signed it, and she kept it. But she went the next day, for the first time since she was 16 years old, to Newgate Ground. There was a stone. It was plain and gray, and it was not new, but it was clean, and somebody had cut the turf back round it within the month. And on it, in a plain Roman letter, there was a name, and there were 2 dates, and beneath the dates there was 1 line more, which no mason in England would have carved, unless he had been paid to carve it and told exactly where to put it. Gideon Cardew, and beneath the dates, H.E. wrote twice. Thomas and Cardew stood in Newgate Ground in the sun and could not, for a long while, do anything at all, because that was the sentence they had killed him with. He wrote twice. It had been read aloud in court and printed in every newspaper in England, and it had never once been offered in his defense. It had been offered as the proof of the thing, for a man who writes twice to say the iron is rotten, and then sets his name to a paper saying the iron is sound, is not a careless man. He is worse. That was the argument. It had hanged him, and it had followed him into the ground. And somebody had gone to a mason and paid him and had those 3 words cut into the stone over a pauper's grave, not as an accusation but as an epitaph. Somebody had taken the sentence the world had murdered her father with and set it above him as the last true thing that could be said of him, in a place where nobody would ever come and read it, and had gone on paying, quarterly, for 10 years, to keep the grass off it. The sexton knew nothing. A fund, he said, years back and paid still, and he had never once seen anybody come. She walked back to Grosvenor Street with her hands shaking, and she did not write it in the 6-penny book because there was no line to put it on. She stopped watching him for the price that day and began watching him for the wound. She went back to the drawing table after that and worked at it every day, and stopped pretending to herself that it was not hers. She had nothing to draw, which was the difficulty. So she drew the house, the stair, rail, the fanlight, the ugly bracket over the garden door, and left the sheets on the table because there was nowhere else to put them, and on the 4th morning there was a pencil note in the margin. It was in the small upright hand, and it said, "The rail is right, and the fanlight is wrong. You have drawn the glazing bars as they ought to be, and not as they are. 2 of them are bent. Go and look." She went and looked. 2 of them were bent. She said so at breakfast aloud to the table at large, since he was reading and had not looked up, and added that it was a piece of impertinence for a man to correct a drawing he had not been shown. He turned a page and said nothing whatever. The next morning there was another note. She understood the arrangement then, and something else with it. He was not doing this because he could not speak. He could speak. She had heard him. He did it because a note may be left, and a note may be ignored, and neither party is obliged to be in the room while the other decides what to do about it. It cost him nothing to be refused on paper. He had built himself a way of reaching out with the hand already withdrawn. She began to leave her answers on the table for him. It became the only real talking she did in that house, and it was carried on entirely in the margins of drawings, in pencil, between 2 people who sat at breakfast the next morning and discussed the weather. She found she preferred it. A man in a room may say a thing to fill a silence, or to be agreeable, or because he has had wine. A man with a pencil in his hand at 6 in the morning has none of those excuses. Everything Everard Caro wrote in those margins had been weighed, and had cost him something, and was true. He was also, unexpectedly, very funny in the driest way she had ever encountered, and the first time she laughed aloud in that house was over a note about a chimney, and in the dark without a word he took her hand. Not to hand her up, not for anybody's benefit. There was no one in the carriage but the 2 of them, and no one outside it who could see. He simply took her hand and held it while the horses turned out of the square, and his own was not steady, and he did not look at her once. Then he let it go and put his back against the seat and said in a perfectly level voice, "That was Article 3. Yes," she said it was. "It will not happen again." No. Neither of them said anything else for the whole of the drive. She sat up that night with the 6-penny book open, and the lamp with the green shade burning, and she looked at the left-hand page and she looked at the right, and she found for the first time that she could not make the entry. She did not know what it had cost him. She did not know what it was worth. And she understood, with a coldness in her chest that had nothing to do with the room, that she had begun to want something again, and she had learned at 16 precisely what came of wanting. You cannot pay a debt. You cannot price. She had built her whole life on the paying of debts, and she sat in the north light with the pen in her hand and the page white in front of her, and could not put a figure to a hand held in the dark by a man who had written down, in his own writing, that he would never do it. Sir Crispin Rathmell was the best-liked man in England, and he had earned it. The great friend of the dead of Sallowfield. Thomasin met him at Farrar's house on the 4th of June, in front of 400 people, and he was very kind to her. "Miss Cardew, I have hoped to meet you. I want to say to you, before all these people, that I bear you no ill will whatever. None. What was done at Sallowfield was not your doing, and I have never in my life believed in visiting the sins of a father upon a child." There was a murmur of approval. It went round the room like warmth. Across the room to where the Duke of Ashmere stood at the wall, with his hands behind him, as he had stood at the wall of every ballroom in London for 10 years. And Ashmere. His voice warmed. It was full of the most genuine and generous concern. We all of us know what he suffered. There is not a man here who has not grieved for him, which is why, I confess, I have wondered, a little we have all wondered, whether the poor fellow is quite equal to what he has undertaken. The room went very still. It was the first time it had been said aloud. "It is a betrothal, and we are dancing, and I am standing here like a coroner. Come, Ashmere." He raised his voice, and it was a beautiful voice, and it went into every corner of that room like light into water. "Enough of the wall? It is your own betrothal, man. Will you not dance with your own bride? Surely tonight, of all nights." And there it was. The Duke of Ashmere did not move. His face gave away nothing at all. But Thomasin was near enough to see his hands which he had put behind him, and they were not still. And she thought, he is going to be destroyed here, in front of me, by his own silence, and he will let it happen. Because he does not believe there is anything he could say that would be worth the saying. Article 4. We do not dance. Article 5. You will not defend me. She had signed both. She had read them in his own hand and signed them, and she had kept every clause of that paper for 11 weeks, like a woman keeping a debt. Thomasin Cardew crossed the floor. She heard the room see her do it. She walked past Sir Crispin Rathmell without looking at him, and went to the wall where her betrothed was standing, and stopped in front of him, and held out her hand, palm up, in front of everybody. "Your Grace," she said, "will you dance with me?" The gray eyes came down to hers. There was something in them she had never seen there, and afterwards she thought it might have been terror. And the Duke of Ashmere put his hand in hers. They danced very badly. And she felt, under her hand on his shoulder, that he was shaking. He was counting. She caught it after a moment, the barest movement of his mouth, and understood that he was counting the steps under his breath, the way a child counts them. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because it was the only thing between him and the floor. So she counted with him. She put her mouth near enough to his ear that nobody else could hear it, and she said very low and very steadily, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and she took his weight where he faltered, and turned him where he did not know he was to turn, and led him badly and openly and in front of the whole of London through a waltz. "You have broken 2 of them," he said. His voice was rough. She felt him laugh. It was not a sound. It was a movement in his chest under her hand. Once, like something shifting after a long time in one position, the music stopped. Nobody applauded, because nobody knew what they had seen. 400 people had come to watch a madman refuse to dance, and had instead watched a ruined girl walk into the middle of the floor and take a duke's hand and hold a man up for the length of a waltz, and there was no name for that in any of their heads, and so the room simply stood there. Thomasin Cardew turned round. "Sir Crispin," she said, and her voice carried perfectly well because she had spent 10 years learning to say her own name in rooms that did not want to hear it. "You were kind to me tonight in front of a great many people. I hope you will forgive me that I have never learned the trick of it. I have only ever been shown kindness where nobody was looking." She put her hand back on the Duke's arm. "I had it from him," she said, "and so did a good many others, and not one of us was ever asked to say thank you for it. I find I have come to prefer that sort." And she walked out of Ferrar's house on the arm of the Duke of Ashmere, through a silence you could have stood a candle in. Lady Honora Frayne came up to her room without knocking and sat down on the bed, which she had never done. "You are going to do something stupid, and you are going to do it because nobody has told you anything. I have watched women do that all my life and never once been quick enough to stop them. I am 74. I have not the patience left to be discreet." "Do not," said Thomasin. "He would never forgive you." "He will never forgive me," Lady Honora agreed. "Sit down, child, and listen, because I shall say at once." She folded her enormous hands. "There is no clause in his father's will." Thomasin did not understand her for a moment. It came in slowly, the way cold water comes through a coat. There never was one. The late Duke's will is a plain will, and it leaves him everything, and it makes no conditions whatever. Fettyplace drew up a false instrument at my godson's instruction. I witnessed it. We are both of us liable to be struck off and disgraced, and I dare say worse. And I would do it again this evening. Why? Because you would not have taken it otherwise. Lady Honora's black eyes were hard and bright and old. He knew that before ever he found you. He knew that Gideon Cardew's daughter had walked out of every town in England rather than be pitied, and that if he had come to you with an open hand, you would have spat in it and been right to. So he built you a bargain. He built you a thing you could take with your head up. He made himself the one who needed something, and you the one who was doing him a service, and he priced it and wrote it down, and signed it, and he made himself as cold as he knew how, so that you would never once suspect you had been given anything at all. 600 a year for your life. Whatever came of it, he settled that before he ever laid eyes on you. The old woman's mouth twisted. The articles are not a wall to keep you out, child. They are a wall to keep you from finding out. Thomasin sat down at last because her legs would not do their work. "Why?" she said. "Why me? Say the rest of it." And Lady Honora Frayne told her the rest of it. "Your father wrote twice." "The whole of England knows he wrote twice. They have been throwing it at his grave for 10 years. What the whole of England has never troubled to ask is who the second letter was written to. The company. There was a young man on the board of the Northern Union Line. He was 23. He had his seat because his father was rich, and it looked well, and he attended 3 meetings a year and understood nothing whatever about iron. He was an ornament. That is the whole of what he was, and he knew it, and he did not mind, because he was 23 and the world was a very fine place. Thomasin could not breathe. Your father wrote to him because he had run out of men to write to, and because a duke's son was the last name on a list of people who might have the standing to stop a railway line. Do not. "The letter came on the morning of the 15th of October, said Lady Honora. "I was in this house. I saw it come." He was dressing for a ball at the Ilfracombeses, and he was late, and in an excellent humor, and he took the letter and looked at the hand and did not know it, and he put it into the breast of his coat and said he would read it after. He was dancing when it fell. That is all. That is the whole of it. He was 23, and he was dancing at the Ilfracombes with an unopened letter in his coat, and at 7 o'clock the Sallowfield Viaduct went into the valley with 91 souls upon it, and one of them was his brother Aubrey, who was 19, and who was on that train because he was coming down to join him. Thomasin put her hands over her face. "He read it at 4 in the morning, said the old woman, when they came to tell him about Aubrey. He read it standing up in his dancing clothes. And that is why the Duke of Ashmere does not dance, and there is not a soul in England who knows it but me, and now you. He went to the inquiry," Thomasin said at last, "did he not? He went to the inquiry and he told them. He stood up in front of 400 people and he held up your father's letter, and he said that Gideon Cardew had warned them, and that the iron was bad, and that Cardew was innocent, and he said it with his whole heart, because he was 23, and he still believed that a truth had only to be spoken to, be heard. She stopped, and they laughed at him. Yes, I was in the gallery. I heard it. They laughed at a boy of 23 who had buried his brother a fortnight before. And then Rathmell's counsel got up, and he was very gentle, and he said what a fine thing it was to see young blood so warm, and what a pity that grief should make a man careless with a dead man's name. And then he took the letter. Thomasin lowered her hands. He held it up, said Lady Honora Frayne, and he said, My lords, the boy has done us a service he never intended. Here is Gideon Cardew on the 12th of October writing that he knows the iron is rotten. And here is Gideon Cardew's certificate, signed in the spring, saying the iron is sound. I had thought this man merely careless, my lords. His own hand has taught me better. He knew, and he signed, and he took his money, and 91 are dead of it, and that is not negligence. And that, said the old woman, is the sentence they have been cutting your father to pieces with ever since. There is not a newspaper in England that did not print it, and not a child in Southwark who could not repeat it to you. And it was put into that man's mouth by Everard Carow, out of the whole and entire goodness of his heart, at 23, because he thought that telling the truth would do good. The room was quite silent. The certificate alone would not have hanged him, said Lady Honora. There was a doubt in it. There was a doubt in it, right up to the day my godson stood up to help. She got to her feet. She was not steady. He has not believed one word of his own to be worth saying since. Not one. He thinks a word out of his mouth is a loaded thing that goes off in the wrong direction. And he has been proved right once, in public, at the top of his life, and no living creature has ever argued him out of it. So he stopped. And he did what a silent man can do instead, and he has been at it 10 years, and he has never been able to finish it, and he will tell you so himself, for he can prove the iron was bad, and he cannot prove that any living man knew it. She went to the door, and he waited, she said, for the daughter. Now you know why there was a table in this room 11 weeks before you were. Thomasin Cardew packed her box that night. She did it very calmly. It did not take long, because she had come with almost nothing, and she would not take a thread of what she had been given. She had fallen in love with a man who was settling an account. Every kindness of that whole strange spring had been laid at the feet of a dead man, and she had been standing in the way of it, and had mistaken it for something meant. She had been an errand. She had been the last item on a list. A boy of 23 began writing in his dancing clothes at 4 in the morning 10 years ago, and she had been fool enough to think that a hand held in a dark carriage had anything to do with her at all. She knelt down and opened the box to put in the 4 drawing books, and she stopped, with her hand on them. He can prove the iron was bad. He cannot prove that any living man knew it. The 3rd book, under the heading Sallowfield, in a round, careful, girlish hand, she had not written since she was 16, were 4 pages of the ironwork of the viaduct as it was delivered to the site. Every girder, every date of delivery, and beside each one copied off the casting itself in the rain, because her father was an exact man and would not take a bill of lading on trust, the founder's mark. On 90 of the girders delivered to Sallowfield between the March and the June was the mark of Rathmell and son of Wolverhampton. Sir Ambrose Rathmell had sold the railway his own iron, at the price of better iron, and had passed the difference into his own pocket, and there was no living man who had ever written that down, except a small exact surveyor who wrote everything down, and his daughter who was 16, and who had copied it out in ink in the evenings, and did not know what she was copying, and had carried it across England in a box for 10 years because she could not bear to sell it for 6pence. Thomasin Cardew sat on the floor of a room in Grosvenor Street with her father's books open in front of her and understood 2 things, and the second one broke her. The first was that she was holding, in her own hand, the thing the Duke of Ashmere had spent 10 years of his life looking for, and the second was that he had never asked her for it. He had sat across a table from her for 11 weeks. He had known what her father was. He had known she must have had something of his, some paper, some book, some scrap out of the wreck of a house that was sold at the door, and he had never once asked. Not in a note, not in a margin, not in a carriage in the dark, because to have asked would have been to have used her. Thomasin got up off the floor and unpacked her box and put her gowns back where they had been. She was not going anywhere. She had come into that house to be saved by him, and she had spent a spring being saved by him, and she was finished with it. There was a man behind that shut door who had believed for 10 years that nothing he said was worth the breath, and there was exactly one person alive who could put into his hands the proof that he had been right all along, and the world had been wrong, and she was sitting on a bedroom floor holding it. She did not tell him, not that night, and not for a fortnight, and she was a long time forgiving herself for the fortnight afterwards, though she never once regretted it. She sat down at the drawing table instead, and lit the lamp with the green shade, and began, at midnight, to make a fair copy. London decided about the dance within the week, and London decided against them, and it was Sir Crispin Rathmell who told it what to think, and he did it with tears in his eyes. A man in such a condition ought not to be marrying anybody, and certainly not the daughter of the man who had killed his brother. And that the terms of the settlement, 600 a year, secured, irrevocable, payable whether or not the marriage endured, had been shown to him, and that he would leave his readers to judge what to make of a woman who would take it. He asked at the end whether it was not the duty of the Duke's friends, at last, to protect him from himself. Rathmell's petition would be presented in the last week of July. Mr. Wretch Porney, Fetty Place, came to Grosvenor Street on the 2nd of July, and put down his hat, and said the thing nobody wanted said. You cannot marry in June, and June is gone in any case. And you cannot marry in July, and I must be very plain about why. If you go into a church with that petition hanging over you, they will not call it a marriage, they will call it evidence. They will say the poor gentleman was hurried to the altar by an interested woman at the very moment the papers were being drawn to protect him, and there is not a court in England that would look at it twice. The doors began to close. She had been received at Beeley House for 51 years. It was the daughter of the house who was sent down to the carriage to say it, and she was pink to the ears, and she could not look at either of them while she said that her mother was not receiving. Lady Honora, 74, sat bolt upright the whole way back to Grosvenor Street without a syllable. Then, on the step, in a voice that would not hold, 51 years, and they would sooner bar the door to me than to Crispin Rathmell. And Thomasin, helping her down, heard what was underneath the rage, which was hurt, and knew whose fault it was. If the commission sat and found for Rathmell, the Duke of Ashmere would be declared of unsound mind, and his estates would go into chancery, and a chancery master in a wig would go through the accounts of Ashmere House, line by line, and he would find the Ashmere Relief Fund, a bank account of enormous size, paying pensions to 41 families, with no committee, no subscribers, no gentlemen, and no reason on earth that any court could be made to understand. And he would stop it. Of course he would stop it. It would be his plain duty to stop it. 41 families, and Sir Crispin Rathmell would take them into his own fund the following week, and there would be a dinner, and he would speak at it, and grown men would weep. Thomasin went to him on the evening of the 17th of July. The study door stood open, as it always did, and the candles were lit and the small upright hand was going across a page. He raised his head. For half a second there was something in his face, then there was not. She stayed where she was and set it flat and whole, with nothing round it. Because he was a man who would take nothing from anybody that was not solid, and the plainest true thing she could put into his hands was the only solid coin she had left. You must let me go. He set down the pen. Your aunt was refused a door today after 51 years because of me. Rathmel will have his commission in a week, and he will have you, and when he has you, he will have the fund. And 41 families will find out what it is to be looked after by a man who wants to be thanked for it." Her voice was very steady. "And there is no answer to it, Your Grace, because the only answer is for you to stand up in a room and speak, and you have not done that in 10 years, and I would not ask it of you if I were dying, Miss Cardew." "I know about the will," said Thomason. "There is no clause. There never was. Lady Honora told me, and I do not forgive her, and I am glad she did it. I know about the letter, and the ball at the Ilfracombe's, and the inquiry, and what Rathmel's counsel did with what you said. She had to stop. I know what it cost you to tell the truth about my father. It cost my father his life. And it has cost you every word you have not said since. So I know what I am," she said. "I am an account being settled. I have been that since the day Mr. Fetty Place got down into the mud of Southwark, and you have paid it, and paid it, and paid it, and it is paid. You owe my father nothing more. You never owed him anything at all, and I will not stand here and be the last installment of a bill a boy of 23 wrote to himself in his dancing clothes. Send me away, and the talk goes out of the door with me. Your aunt keeps her 51 years. Your fund keeps its money. You keep your quiet. That is the whole of what I have left to give anybody, and I would like to be allowed to give it." There was a silence then, and it had a different weight to it than any of the others. He stood up. He came round the desk. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to lift her face to his, and she saw in the gray eyes the whole of the wound Lady Honora had named, and something else besides. Something that had grown all that spring in a room in the North Light and had nothing whatever to do with a dead man. And the Duke of Ashmere, who had not made a speech in a public room in 10 years, opened his mouth and said, "No, one syllable, low and scraped and plainly expensive." Thomason had been 10 years in rooms where nobody spoke to her at all, and she thought she had never in her life been handed anything so extravagant. "No," he said again, and it steadied. "You will not go. I let you think it was an account because an account is a thing I know how to close. I have closed everything in silence for 10 years. It is the one skill I have. It was an account in January when I sent Fetty Place to Bristol. It stopped being one on the 14th of May at my own breakfast table, when you informed me in front of my aunt and 2 footmen that I was impertinent." Thomason stared at him. "Nobody has called me impertinent in 10 years. They call me mad. They call me proud. They call me poor Ashmere, and they drop their voices when I have gone by. Not one of them has thought me enough of a man to be rude to. You did it over a fanlight at 9:30 in the morning, and I went out of that room and stood in the hall and could not think what to do with myself. I did not tell you. I let you go on believing it was a debt, because I gave up a long time ago on the notion that anything I said could make a thing true or safe or worth what it costs to say it. That was not prudence. I have called it prudence for 10 years, and it was fear. And I am done with it, and you are the reason, and you did not even mean to be. Everard, Rathmel will not have you," he said, "and he will not have them. And I am not going to stop him by keeping quiet and letting it happen and calling my silence good sense." His mouth moved. It was very nearly a smile, and she had never seen it before. "I have spent 10 years believing that the worst thing a man can do is say a true thing and watch it turn round and kill somebody. I have found out this spring that there is something worse, and I have been doing it the whole time. It is to sit on a truth that would save people, and let them go under, and call yourself wise for it." Thomason found she could not speak at all. "There is a ball at Fair's house on Friday," he said. "The last of the season, in the same rooms where he did it to us in June, and he will be there at the very top of himself, and the whole of London will come to look at me once more before the commission sits." He turned away and turned back. I shall go, I shall speak. I shall put in front of them every scrap I have gathered in 10 years. And it will not be enough, and I know it will not be enough, because I can prove the iron was bad, and I cannot prove that one living soul knew it. They will hear me out, and pity me, and commit me on the Monday. Yes, said Thomason. You need not come. I am coming. On Friday, said Thomason Cardew, you will speak, and you will say everything you have, and then you will stop and you will sit down. She was shaking. She kept her voice perfectly level. And then I shall stand up. He went white. No. Yes. Whatever it is, you will not. I forbid it. Thomason, I have spent 10 years making certain that no part of this ever came near you. And I will not. Your Grace, she said, you have run out of articles. Farrar's house on the last Friday in July had 300 people in it, and a floor, chalked that morning with a great rose in 6 colors, and by midnight there would be nothing left of it at all. Thomason walked in on Lady Honora's arm, and they were cut, and it was done quickly and by everybody at once. A pocket of cold air formed round the two of them and traveled with them across the room. Lady Honora Frayne, 74, went through it with her chin up and her hand shaking on Thomason's arm. Sir Crispin Rathmell stood at the center of the room, magnificent and sorry for them, and taking great care that everybody could see how sorry he was, and the Duke of Ashmere was at the wall where he had stood for 10 years, until he was not. People did not understand what they were seeing at first. They saw the silent Duke come off the wall and cross the long room, and they made way for him as they always made way, and they supposed he was leaving. He walked to where his betrothed stood in her little pocket of cold, and he stepped into it and stood beside her, and he did it slowly, so that every person in that room was obliged to watch him do it. The cold air now had a Duke standing in the middle of it. It could no longer be maintained for nothing. And then he turned round and faced the room, and he spoke to it. You must forgive me. I am badly out of practice, as you know, and I shall very likely do this poorly. 10 years ago, the Sallowfield Viaduct fell and killed 91 people. My brother was one of them. He was 19. A man was convicted for it, and his name was Gideon Cardew, and he was innocent. I have known that for 10 years. So have 1 or 2 of you. The room made a sound. He let it pass. He wrote twice. You all know he wrote twice. You have been using it against him for a decade. He wrote first to the company, and the company put it in a drawer, and then he wrote to a boy of 23 who sat on the board of that line because his father was rich, and who was, at the moment the letter reached him, dressing for a ball. I had that letter in my coat, said the Duke of Ashmere. I did not open it. I was dancing when the bridge came down and my brother was on the train, and I have not danced since, and now you have your answer, and I will not be asked about it again. Somewhere, at the back, a woman began to cry. I stood up at the inquiry, and told the truth and told it with my whole heart, and some of you in this room laughed at me. I know which of you. And then Sir Ambrose Rathmell's counsel took that letter out of my hand and turned it over, and used it to prove that Cardew had known the iron was rotten, and had signed for it regardless, and was therefore not a careless man, but something a great deal blacker. I watched an innocent man carried into Newgate on a true thing I had spoiled in the saying of it, too young, too loud, and with nothing whatever standing under it. And I learned what you taught me that night, which is, that a truth in a room like this one weighs nothing at all, unless a man can put something under it. So, I stopped talking, and for 10 years I have been putting something under it. The iron in the Sallowfield Viaduct was not the iron in the contract. I have the assay. I have the invoices. I have the sworn word of 2 men who cast it and 1 who carted it. The ironwork of that bridge was cheap iron, sold at the price of good iron, and the difference went into a pocket. He stopped, and that is all I have. The silence went on a beat too long. "I can prove the iron was bad," said the Duke of Ashmere into 300 faces. "I cannot prove that any living man knew it. I have spent 10 years and a great deal of money, and I have never been able to close it. And I am telling you so myself, because I have finished with cleverness. There it is. Make of it what you can." And Sir Crispin Rathmell began to clap. He did it slowly, and he did it kindly, and his eyes were wet. And you have all seen it now, as I have seen it, and I do not think there is a soul here who can still doubt what must be done, and done gently, and done soon. Sir Crispin. Thomasin Cardew stepped forward, and she was carrying 4 books. "You are quite right," she said. "He cannot close it." The room turned. "I can." She set the books down on a card table and opened the 3rd, and her hands were perfectly steady, which surprised her all her life afterwards. "My name is Thomasin Cardew, and I am the daughter of Gideon Cardew, and from the age of 12 I was his draftsman, because he could not afford a clerk, and I was quick. These are his field books. Everything he saw he wrote down, and in the evenings I copied it out fair, in ink, in this hand which is mine, and which I have not written in since I was 16 years old." She turned the book round so that the room could see the page. He would not take a bill of lading on trust. He was an exact man. When the ironwork came up to the Sallowfield site, he went out in the rain and read the founder's mark off every girder as it came off the wagon, and he called it out, and I wrote it down. There are 90 of them on these 4 pages. The contract called for Staffordshire iron of the first quality. She looked up. "Every one of the 90 is marked Rathmell and Son of Wolverhampton. Sir Ambrose Rathmell built that bridge," said Thomasin. "Sir Ambrose Rathmell sold the railway the iron to build it with out of his own foundry, at another man's price. My father wrote it down 4 months before it fell, and he condemned it, and he wrote twice, and nobody read it. And then somebody put his name to a certificate he never signed, and let him die of it in Newgate, and built an orphans' fund upon the 91 and has been dining out on it ever since." She closed the book. "You have, all of you, spent 10 years asking why the Duke of Ashmere does not speak," said Thomasin Cardew. "Not one of you has ever asked why nobody asked me." 300 people turned slowly and looked at Sir Crispin Rathmell. And Thomasin, watching him, saw the thing she would remember longest out of that whole night. And it was not triumph, and it gave her no pleasure at all. It was not the face of a man learning something. It was the face of a man who had been waiting 10 years to be asked. He said nothing. There was nothing to say, and he was the finest speaker of his generation, and he stood in the middle of the ruined chalk rows and could not find one word of it. He gathered up what was left of himself, which was very little, and he went out, and the room opened to let him through, and did not trouble to close behind him. And Thomasin, watching him, saw the thing she would remember longest out of that whole night, and it was not triumph, and it gave her no pleasure at all. It was not the face of a man learning something. It was the face of a man who had been waiting 10 years to be asked. And in the ringing quiet of Ferrers' house, with 300 people standing about her like statues, and the chalk rows trodden into a grey smear under everybody's feet, Thomasin Cardew turned to the Duke of Ashmere and held out her hand, palm up. "Your Grace," she said, "there is one article left. Will you dance?" The petition was withdrawn on the Monday. The commission never sat. They put her father's name right in the autumn, on paper, in a small room with lawyers in it, nobody weeping, because the loud part was over, and what was left was clerking. The document said, in language with no blood in it at all, that the conviction of Gideon Cardew was bad and was set aside, and that nothing now stood against his name, nor against the name of any child of his. Thomasin read it in the room above the garden, in the north light, with the Duke of Ashmere beside her, and she cried, which she had drilled out of herself at 16 and had not done since. He did not write her a note. He did not reach for anything. He put his arm round her and let her cry, and did not say one word. And it was the first silence of that whole silent year that had nothing missing from it. "He never knew," she said when she could. That is what I cannot get past. He died believing that not one soul in England believed him. He died believing his whole careful, honest life had come to nothing, and that he had left me a poisoned name and no future in the world. If he had known there was one man in England of any consequence at all who believed him, and who meant to go on until it was proved. Everard Caro was quiet for a long moment. Then he went to the desk and unlocked a drawer he had never, in all those months, opened in front of her, and took out a letter and gave it to her. It was sealed. It had never been opened. It was addressed, in the small, exact, upright hand, to Mr. Gideon Cardew at Newgate. I wrote it in the January, he said. After the conviction, before he died. You never sent it. No. Why? Because I had already made that man one promise in a public room, in front of 400 people, and it had helped to kill him. He looked at the wall. I could not think what my word would be worth to him in a cell. I thought it would be an insult to send it. I thought a dying man ought not to have to spend the last of his strength being gracious about a boy's apology. I have been wrong about a great many things. I have never been so wrong as I was about that, and I have had 10 years to understand it, and there is no mending it. And I keep the letter where I can see it, so that I never once forget that I did not send it. Thomasin turned it over in her hands. She did not open it. May I read it? It is yours. It always was. She broke the seal. It was 4 lines, sir. I had your letter. I did not open it. I was dancing. I do not ask you to forgive that, and I will not insult you by asking. I know that you are innocent. I said so, and was not believed, and my saying so has done you harm, and I will not speak again until I can speak to some purpose. I will spend my life getting the proof, however long it takes. You will not live to see it. Your daughter will. E. Caro. Thomasin Cardew read it 3 times. Then she folded it and held it against her mouth, and stood in the north light for a long while with her eyes shut. He should have had this, she said, not the name, and do you know what I would have given, at 16 for 4 lines of somebody believing him? I would have given my hands. It is 4 lines of a boy's guilt. It is 4 lines of a man not lying, said Thomasin, which is a rarer thing, and I've been 10 years looking for one. And she looked up at him, at the hard, closed face, and the gray eyes, and the 10 years written into all of it, and she broke the last of his rules, the one at the foot of the page below the rule, in his own hand, that had never been a condition because he had no right to make it one. I am sorry for you, said Thomasin Cardew. I have been sorry for you since the 4th of June, and I intend to go on being sorry for you for a very long time, and you may write it into the articles if you like, and I shall break that one too. He asked her in October, in the room with the north light, and he made a poor job of it. He had put everything into her hands first, the 600, and a great deal more, and her father's name, and a house of her own in Berkshire, the whole of it signed and witnessed and beyond recall, so that she could have walked out that same afternoon, and wanted for nothing to the end of her life. It is all yours, whatever you say to me. Fetty Place has the papers. There is not a thing in this house you need, and I have gone to some trouble about that, because in March you had nowhere on this earth to be, and I have never got the picture of it out of my head. So you can tell me to go to the devil this afternoon and be no worse off in the morning. That is the entire point of it. I wanted to be asking you a question you were free to answer. He stopped. She saw what it cost. I have been by myself inside my own head for 10 years, and I did not know that was a thing worth complaining of until you came into this house and filled it up with arguments about a fanlight. Do not go. Not because you owe me, and not because it was agreed, and not because it would be easier. Stay, if you should like to. He was rough, and 10 years out of practice and always would be, and his voice went wrong in the middle of it, and she thought she would not have taken it any other way, because a smooth speech costs a man nothing, and every stumble in that one was a receipt. Marry me, said the Duke of Ashmere, and then talk at me, and make me answer you. I have not the trick of it anymore, and I have never once wanted the trick of it with anybody else, and I have a very great deal put by." She did not answer him at once. She went to the drawer of the dressing table and took out a plain sixpenny notebook and put it into his hands. He opened it. The left-hand pages were black, with entries in her hand, dated a fire, a table, £12, a gown, a green lamp, a hand held in a carriage in May. The right-hand pages, all of them from the first to the last, were perfectly blank. "I began that in my first week," she said. "It is what I owe you. I meant to see it, and price it, and pay it, and walk out of this house square with you and owing nothing, because that was the only way I was ever taught to take anything from anybody." She lifted it out of his hands and shut it. "It does not balance," said Thomas and Cardew. "It never did. I have decided to stop keeping the account." She was crying, and she was perfectly steady, and she found the two things went together very well. "Yes, I will marry you, and I shall talk at you a great deal, and I give you fair warning that I have grown fond of one or two of the silences, and I mean to keep those." They were married in the autumn, in a small church, with almost nobody in it, because neither of them could see what grandeur was for. Lady Honora Frayne sat at the front in the purple, taking the credit with her whole face, and went on taking it, out loud, in company, for the remaining 11 years of her life. There is a habit the two of them kept for the rest of their lives, and nobody who had not heard the whole story could ever be made to see the sense of it. Twice a year, on the 2 anniversaries, the Duke and Duchess of Ashmere went into the ballroom of their own house when there was nobody in it, and no musicians, and no chalk on the floor, and nobody at all to see, and they danced to keep one stranger out of his house. He had written them the way a man rules off a working drawing, a small, exact, upright hand, a fine line between each, no flourishes, his name at the bottom, and he had meant every word of every one of them. And she had gone through the lot of them, the way 300 people go across a chalked rose, not all at once, not on purpose, mostly, a foot here and a foot there, over the course of one season, until there was no rose left, and no pattern left, and nothing on that floor but the gray smear where something beautiful and useless had been. That is what such things are drawn for. That is what they have always been drawn for. You lay them out perfectly, in 6 colors, on your knees, for a whole day. And then you open the doors, and you let somebody dance on them,